Welcome to the Future Proof Leader podcast. My name is Jessica Raypatch. I am the co-founder of Twin Legacy Solutions. And today I'm excited to have Paul Raggio. He's the founder of 5-Star Leader Development. So welcome, Paul. Thanks for being on the show today. Why don't we kick it off by you just telling us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. I'm a fractional executive and an executive coach. And so from a fractional standpoint, I can serve as a CEO or COO, and sometimes it's on interim basis. Sometimes it'll be on long-term basis. So interim may be a few months, long-term may be well over 12 months. And then I'm an executive coach where I coach both the CEO and sometimes their leadership team if they have other people in the C-suite. And I do that on probably an hourly, weekly basis, and I help them integrate best business practices into their business and increase their valuation for future sale.
Oh, you're a busy guy. That's awesome. So you work closely with CEOs and executive teams. So what's something most leaders think they're good at, but behind the scenes, they really do struggle with?
So I see a lot of times that they have the ability to visualize where they want to go and put together a strategic plan. And what I often see is that there's a lack of connection between the strategy and the resources they're going to consume in achieving that plan. So there's a real disconnect between the visualization. There may be some execution issues, and then really how they burn through resources is what I help them focus on, and being able to achieve what their long-term goals are, but being very prudent about the expenditure of resources doing it.
So as you work with the executives, what separates a good executive leader from a great executive leader during that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll say it's their mindset. When you get to the CEO space, you start to think, I've earned my way here, been through a journey to get to this point. I have a lot of knowledge and expertise, and I just want to get after it now. I want to be able to lead this endeavor on whatever journey I decide to take. And I often find those that can be more contemplative and reflective and good listeners and really look at all the sides of the cube in terms of valued input from their leadership team, really make a difference in their forward progress. And so if I were to say there's one thing I would encourage CEOs to do is to be very open-minded and receptive to a lot of ideas, not only from your leadership team, but even from lower management and your entry-level people. They have a lot of advice that they can give that will be relevant to the growth of the company.
I think that's great advice. I had a podcast yesterday. It hasn't gone live yet, but it was with a coach that doesn't coach CEOs and executives, but he coaches the emerging leaders, like the boots on the deck leaders, the middle managers. And we were just talking about how important that is when you empower and give the opportunity to all the leaders in the organization to have a say in the solution or the overall vision. Not only does it help the CEO and founders achieve their goals, but it also helps everyone buy in to the vision more, because you're opening the floor. And I made a point to talk about how most of the times I consider myself like a servant leader. I always have. Most of the time when I gave, hey, this is our goal, this is our mission, let's talk about like how we can achieve it. Why don't you guys go and figure out something? Especially with my Marines, they really loved to be empowered to go figure it out themselves. They don't like to be bossed around. So when I did that, I often found that the solutions they came up with were much better than anything I had ever envisioned in my mind of how we were going to achieve the goal. So I think that's a really good piece of advice, because a lot of people, I think, as CEOs and founders, you are so top heavy with your strategic thinking, and it's easy to forget the boots on the deck. So that's great advice. So we are talking a lot about vision, right? And so when we talk about execution, what are some specific things in the execution? I know you mentioned resources, but what are some other specific execution pieces that are so critical into ensuring that your vision comes to life?
Well, the most important thing you can do is to remain focused. And so there's a lot of different techniques that you can use in the business world now, but I'm a big believer in using objectives and key results, OKRs, and it helps define the goals, and then it's measurable over time. So you're establishing milestones, you're achieving milestones, you're measuring progress against the milestones, and it keeps you focused on the direction that you're headed. And often I find when this gets back to the strategic plan. You can put together a strategic plan, and you can put together an execution plan with it. But if we don't look at that and use it on a daily basis, it's a living plan, it's an executing document, then it just sits on a shelf and we lose focus. And that's where all the distractions come in a normal daily business life. And when you have distractions, it creates chaos, and chaos creates a drag on the velocity of your business. So when you can implant something like, or even for some of the mid-level and smaller companies, if you use a system like EOS or one of these others, Traction, it helps you focus on what those relevant things are that you need to accomplish day to day, week to week, month to month, and quarterly to achieve what you want in terms of an annual goal. So that's what I would say is the most important, is that you stay laser focused on those objectives and key results you're trying to achieve over time.
And when you work with a CEO or a founder, how does that relationship look like? What does that look like for you? Is that weekly check-ins, monthly check-ins? How often should you be reassessing without, I guess, without overkill?
As an executive coach, one of the best ways I've seen of helping them develop is meet with them on a weekly basis for an hour. And it's a highly focused, energized meeting. You leave there, or he or she will leave there with essentially homework to do or things to think about for the next meeting. But we always start with, I always start an engagement with an analysis of the company, and it really looks at it from top to bottom, not only the financials, but all the processes, workflows, the organizational structure, the technology integration that it has in the business, and the talent. And then I help them put together a game plan on improving in those areas over time. And so when you scale, you never achieve 100% of capability. So as you scale, you'll see that one area may drop again, say, for example, in talent. And what are you doing in developing talent, or how are you recruiting for talent? Those are type of things that happen over time. So my engagement is usually weekly. I've tailored it to other CEOs on their schedule. I look for long-term engagements. I don't look for a project-based. I really do want to provide continuity to the leader in his or her development and growing the company. That helps them if they have a board of directors. It helps the board of directors, and it helps the rest of the C-suite team.
Oh, yeah, I would think so. I don't know if it's worth investing in just a short-term solution. I feel like coaching is just, like you said, increments, take it in increments.
Right.
So once you get on a solid plan, an execution-based plan, you're moving forward, crisis is bound to hit, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what does poor leadership look like in those moments?
Probably overreaction, maybe two things. Either overreaction or underreaction. And the underreaction is, I wish it would go away. The overreaction is, I'm solving the wrong problem. And so there's a period when you hit a crisis, it's really trying to understand what the issue is or the challenge that needs to be addressed, and then starting a communication plan just to over communicate and how to resolve it. But wishing something away isn't going to make progress. And then overreacting, you can actually exacerbate the problem. So and it could be done very quickly, but it has to be a mindset thing again, where I'm really focused on what is the issue, what is it that I'm trying to overcome. Share that with the team, and then you get team input again too. That becomes just as important, that you include your other leaders in whatever that problem identification is.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of team, what recommendations do you make to leaders or C-suite individuals to hold their teams accountable while also inspiring them, holding high standards, but also keeping them motivated? Building trust, confidence. This is something I've seen in my career where there was a disconnect between higher level management and middle managers. So I guess it's hard to make that connection. So how do you maintain high standards, but also instilling inspiration into your team?
That's an issue right now, I think, in our society. I make a clear distinction between being a very proficient manager and being an exceptional leader. So let's just, in general terms, define leadership as the ability to emotionally connect with your followers and provide them purpose, vision, mission, a direction, and then inspire them to act. That's what a leader does. A manager really looks at the talent that they have, the human talent, and they try to marry that talent to workflow processes, procedures, standards, and technology integration. So there is a unique difference there. What I and a lot of this, as you know, comes from our military background. The leadership aspect is not as developed in the business world as the managerial aspect.
Absolutely.
And so I help quite a bit in terms of the CEOs just realizing you may have an exceptional management team and process. You've done a great job of marrying talent to your workflow processes and technology integration, but they do a terrible job of inspiring them to act. Those are their skills. This acts back down to high performing teams. And if you want a high performing team, the first level of course is trust, and being able to trust that you can trust your teammates, you can trust your leader. And once you do that, as you said earlier, it really empowers them. That's where their creativity comes in. They also have to be able to challenge each other and then hold each other accountable for achieving what value they bring to the team. So the inspiration comes in is when a leader can clearly articulate, this is my vision, this is my purpose, and this is the direction we're heading. And then you empower your people to get to that. And you'll find a lot of creativity evolves, and your solutions become much better. The velocity of your organization in the marketplace becomes much faster. It's a remarkable thing when you can fully develop both those components, the leadership and the management aspects of running a business.
Well, I love, it's not often that I talk to someone that does understand there's a clear difference between leadership and management. A lot of people talk to leadership and management, but they definitely tie the components together. And I think you've hit it really hard, which is great that you work with CEOs on this because, like you said, managers, they're in the execution portion, they're assigning, they're making things run. But leaders are like I feel like they really run the mission. They're the ones that have to drive people to where they need to go without being right there all the time. And how you do that, you motivate, you inspire, you empower, all those things. That's hard to teach.
It's hard to teach, although again, we look at our backgrounds. If you just consider even what's happening in the Middle East right now, how do you inspire our troops to perform in these environments? I mean, from a managerial standpoint, they're all qualified. They go through different training and they have a skill set that they're performing under and within. That's all. It's all the management piece of it. They know how to do this. They know the uniform. They know the equipment. They know the capability of the equipment that they're employing. That's all the management piece of it. But getting them to perform in an environment where it's could be a life or death environment, that requires inspiration. That requires the leader to be able to inspire them to achieve unbelievable results with what they have and what they're equipped to perform with. That's a whole different thing than the management aspect of it. And so part of leadership is just the growth of your own leadership and understanding that how you influence people, how you talk to them, that you're a servant leader of the service. Teach a servant leader. We always place the good of our troops before ourselves. I mean, that means we're respecting them, the value that they bring. We want to hear what they have to say. And we also know that we have an obligation to take care of them, both whether you're in a combat situation or outside of a combat situation, and their families. I mean, this is all part of this leadership concept of I care for other people, I influence other people, and I inspire them by giving them a real life vision on how to get through very tough missions. It's very different.
It is different. And I think it goes back to the why. If you don't really understand why you're doing something or what the overarching benefit is to not just the company, but for us with our background, the mission of what we're doing, the Middle Eastern conflict, I'm sure whatever wars you might have went to, but understanding what the impact is critical. And as much as I'm a servant leader and I'm that 90% of the time, when you develop that relationship with your counterparts, your company, I want to say troops, with your coworkers, when it does come time for you to say, hey, listen, you need to listen to me right now, go and do this, like right now, they'll trust you enough to just go do it, right?
Right.
They trust you, that confidence in what you're saying, that they can go and follow your orders without question because they know that you have your best interest in mind. The 10% of the time, I don't think in the corporate world there's ever like a huge need to do that. But I think the why behind why you do things, even when you're working with a corporation, if I walked into a company and said, do you know the mission of our corporation, our company? Do you know the overarching mission, why we're here? I don't know if many people would know how to answer that question. I just come in, I've worked with a lot of people through my lifetime and, oh, I just work for a paycheck. I come in, I do my job, I leave 4 o'clock, I clock out. I'm going to be a mom, a dad, or whatever. But wouldn't it be nice if everybody you walked into a business and they're like, hey, what's your mission here? And they knew the actual mission statement or the impact of what that company was doing in the world. I think that they would get a lot different results.
Yeah, there's a great book on this by Simon Sinek. I don't if you've read it or not, and those in the audience, if you haven't, you should. And the title of the book is Why.
Yeah,
And so
definitely heard of it.
Simon Sinek makes the argument that people don't buy, your how, they buy your why. And so why are you doing this? The purpose and where do you see you're headed with it is what inspires people or attracts them to whatever you're positioning in terms of a product or a service. It's an important read and something that I have my clients read because that's the start of this whole business journey is if you can define your why and then you can articulate it, you'll have a market that's inspired to buy what you produce or provide in terms of services. It's a big difference.
It does make a difference. This is like kind of a different space, but part of my company, what we do is like the lead generation. Everyone's wanting lead generation. I do some sales coaching, and people are always ask me, well, what can I say to really get someone to sell them and stuff? And I always say, just talk about what you know and what you do best. People will understand whether you're passionate about your work, you're organized about your work, what you have is quality or not quality. They're going to buy not because you have a good sales script. That'll help you a little bit. But what gets people to actually work with you is being genuine, honest, transparent, and be very thorough with what you do and what you can offer. Very clear, defined deliverables, very clear about what you can and cannot do. You build trust first. And that's how you work with clients. It's simple. I mean, to me, it's simple, right? That's where you find your most success. Okay, I have more questions for you. What's one habit or discipline that every high-performing leader has?
Would
Yeah,
say,
we can change it to should have.
yeah, I think what I've seen over time, those that are most self-reflective, meaning that I evaluate myself, this gets a lot into emotional intelligence, and those that really have a critical view of themselves, first individual performance, and then how they're perceived externally in the whether it's a social or professional environment, create the most influence over those that would be considered followers or clients or others. So it's this whole concept, and it does lead a lot to servant leadership, but emotional intelligence, the study of that is probably came out in the late 90s or so. And people started to think of this, really adopt it, that it wasn't just a soft piece of leadership. It's a very important element that you're empathetic and you're listening and you're trying to understand and you're engaged. You aren't distracted by your own, whether it's position or other activities, but you're truly engaged with the person that you're speaking with. And again, whether it's one of your employees or one of your clients or one of your leaders, and that can't be done unless you really spend time self-reflecting. And that self-reflection is really meant to look at what am I doing that I can improve in, and how am I being perceived by those that I have to interact with. And looking at that in terms of I have the ability, and a lot of times, especially a CEO, has so much authority that they take that for granted and they surpass that. They don't do a good job of self-reflection in terms of what am I modeling to those that I'm trying to influence. And so that to me is the number one thing I look at in helping to coach CEOs is just developing a pattern of self-reflection, even affirmations, whether it's affirmations or self-reflection on what you can do to improve yourself. And when your followers see this, when they see that you're into self-improvement, what do? They mirror your actions. They too look to self-improve. They too look to self-reflect. They're much more conscious about delivery in front of others and how they're perceived. So that's an area I think is ripe for development. And it doesn't matter if you're a emerging CEO, a newly elevated CEO, or an old CEO. This part doesn't end. The self-reflection is a piece that should be part of your daily leadership routines, is what I call them.
Do you do an assessment for that when you're working with leadership? I would assume like a peer review or a self-assessment,
I can, yes. I have access to different tools that can do the assessment. And they're very effective. You take them in a holistic manner, and any of those tools that you use, that's one of the things I just sharing, and I'm sure you've had them, but in the Army War College, they gave us, I don't know how many different assessments,
Assessments, yes.
from 360 degrees to Myers-Briggs to DISC and so they all tell you something different. And you can't be resistant to what they're telling you. You need to really embrace what they mean if you want to be self-reflective and grow. But yes, they're very useful tools. I would again encourage anybody going into those positions that if they have the opportunity, they ought to take the assessments. They're revealing.
Yeah, if you're honest on them, then yeah, they're pretty revealing. I always got a kick out the basic school. We used to do some peer assessments. Even in I think a couple of my corporate jobs, it's always interesting to see what people, perceive, how they perceive you and how you perceive yourself, the comparison. You think you're an easygoing person, easy to talk to. Oftentimes when certain positions I've had, I would consider myself pretty easygoing. And I've got some reviews like, oh, you're pretty intimidating. I don't want to talk. It's hard to come up to because it's just like intimidating. I don't want to. I was like, oh man, that's this. And I really need to change because as the leader should be approachable. And that's something I had to work on that I didn't even know was coming across as intimidating, which I don't think is a great trait to have. So anyway, Paul, where can people find you if they're looking for your services?
Yeah, great. Thanks. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm active on LinkedIn. I publish a daily best business practice or leadership note. So just dial in Paul Raggio and you'll see that. And my website is 5starleaderdevelopment.com. So just like on the banner that you see here.
Perfect. That's amazing. Well, I appreciate your time and I learned a lot. I loved your feedback and it's cool. It's interesting work that you're doing, hard work, I'm sure. But thank you for taking the time to come onto the podcast. And to our audience members, thanks for tuning in and we will see you next time.
Great. Thanks, Jessica.